Hey, welcome to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case.
And I'm Renata Kiss.
And tonight, Kamala Harris holds her first campaign rally in Wisconsin.
Meanwhile, Trump raises FEC concerns over Harris's campaign funds.
And hundreds of anti-Israel protesters are arrested in D.C. All right, well, it looks like Kamala Harris's campaign is now officially underway. The vice president held her first campaign rally in the swing state of Wisconsin yesterday after receiving the backing of Democrat leaders in both the House and the Senate.
So now that the process is played out, from the grassroots bottom up, we are here today to throw our support behind Vice President Kamala Harris.
Vice President Harris has earned the nomination from the grassroots up and not the top down. She is ready, she is willing, she is able to energetically and emphatically lead America into the future.
That was Senate Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, both of them throwing their support behind Harris. During her speech yesterday, Harris pledged to advance liberal priorities if elected, including federal abortion access and gun control. As the former Attorney General of California, Harris also said she was well prepared to make the case against Donald Trump, who she attacked as a convicted felon.
As Attorney General of California, I took on one of our country's largest for-profit colleges that was scamming students. Donald Trump ran a for-profit college that scammed students. As a prosecutor, I specialized in cases involving sexual abuse. Well, Trump was found liable for committing sexual abuse. As Attorney General of California, I took on the big Wall Street banks and held them accountable for fraud. Donald Trump was just found guilty of fraud on 34 counts.
Meanwhile, Trump is preparing attacks of his own, going after Harris for her failures as President Biden's border czar.
Kamala Harris was appointed border czar, as you know, in March of 2021, and since that time, millions and millions of illegal aliens have invaded our country, and countless Americans have been killed by migrant crime because of her willful demolition of American borders and laws.
At the same time, Harris is vetting potential vice presidential candidates. According to USA Today, Harris has requested to vet at least 7 potential candidates, including North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, U.S. Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. Despite expectations, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg did not make it on that list. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer has also indicated that she has no intention of leaving her position. Political science professor at Boston College David Hopkins says that Harris needs to pick someone who balances her ethnicity and state of origin, which, as we mentioned, is California. Hopkins said she would need someone from a different part of the country or a battleground state.
And you would think if you were just going down to check the boxes that might be Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. He's fairly moderate, right. He's well liked, he's a governor of a battleground state. So do you think that's going to be the case?
And to me, he almost seems too strong to be a vice presidential candidate. I think he would be more of a presidential candidate.
So you think he might be saving it for 2028? He's like, Harris is kind of behind the 8 ball, so maybe I'm going to wait. I could imagine quite a few governors might be thinking that, might want to save off till 2028,
yeah,
but we'll see.
I think we'll have to see, yeah.
Meanwhile, pro-lifers are sounding the alarm over Harris's abortion policy as she looks to make expanding abortion access a key part of her campaign.
And we, who believe in reproductive freedom, will stop Donald Trump's extreme abortion bans because we trust women to make decisions about their own body and not have their government tell them what to do.
Live Action founder Lila Rose described Harris as carrying out a crusade against pro-life Americans and the preborn as vice president, saying a Harris presidency would be disastrous for human rights. At the same time, Marjorie Dannenfelser, she's the president of Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, she claims that Harris would try to federalize late-term abortions, noting that Harris has refused to say whether she supports any limits on abortion at all.
What is it that you believe? I mean, what week of pregnancy should abortion access be cut off?
We need to restore the protections of Roe versus Wade. We're not trying to do something new.
Well, that was nebulous because it was about viability, which could be anywhere between 20 to 24 weeks. And
so no. Let me be very clear.
The Women's Health Protection Act that the White House also endorsed.
Let me be very clear. From day one, the president has been clear. I have been clear. We need to put back the protections that are in Roe v. Wade into law.
Dannenfelser also noted that Harris has praised efforts by Democrat AGs to crack down on pro-life pregnancy centers and is, by the way, the first sitting vice president ever to campaign at an abortion clinic.
Meanwhile, as the vice president receives all of Biden's campaign funds, Trump's team is filing an FEC complaint against Harris, saying the transfer is a brazen money grab. Harris received $91 million from Biden's campaign after his departure, which the Trump campaign argues goes against campaign finance laws. General counsel for the Trump campaign, David Warrington, said the Democrats' move was a brazen money grab that would constitute the single largest excessive contribution and biggest violation in the history of the Federal Election Campaign Act of 1971 as amended. Trump's campaign argued that the committee must not sit idly by while Harris takes almost $100 million in donations, which originally were meant for Biden. They said this is not only an FEC violation, but also the will of the donors.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump is also eager to debate Kamala Harris. Speaking to reporters on a press call yesterday, Trump said he'd absolutely debate Harris and would even be open to debating her more than once, although Trump also said he's not entirely thrilled with the current plan of having ABC News as the host.
I'm not thrilled about ABC because they're truly fake news. I watched last night. They're actually trying to make a hero out of Joe Biden when he was the worst president in history, and they were doing things like with Kamala, like what a wonderful thing it is that she is running. She is not the candidate that they should have. You know it, I know it, we all know it. So, I'm not thrilled with ABC. I guess they commit, but I have at least equal say, and I don't like the idea of ABC. I would be willing to do more than one debate, actually.
Trump had originally agreed to 2 debates against Joe Biden, one in June on CNN. That's the one that basically led to the end of Joe Biden's campaign, and then the other was scheduled in September on ABC. Posting on Truth Social, Trump suggested Fox News should host the debate instead.
And before a quick break here, New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez announced that he will resign next month following the corruption trial that found him guilty of accepting bribes. His resignation comes as Senate Democrats threatened to vote him out of office if he didn't step down. Even Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer called on Menendez publicly to resign. Both the New Jersey senator and his wife were charged with conspiracy to commit bribery, honest services fraud, and extortion. Though Menendez had maintained innocence, he was found guilty of 16 felony counts. According to Axios, Menendez plans to resign on August 20th. And up next, hundreds are arrested in D.C. as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu prepares to speak to Congress. The details after this.
I'm involved with a pro-life clinic, and we do ultrasounds weekly. And last week, just one example of a mom who came in was very abortion-minded, and when she saw the picture of her baby on ultrasound and saw that beating heart, it was a defining moment that just broke her, and she said, I just can't allow this baby to be killed, were her own words. And then we were able to share the gospel. Sometimes we were able to give out a Bible if they're open and just minister to her the truth, the scientific truth, and God's love.
Would you join us and Preborn in the fight against abortion? Give right now by dialing pound 250 and saying that keyword baby. Your gift will help change the mind and heart of a mother considering an abortion. Pick up that phone again. Donate by dialing pound 250 and saying the keyword baby.
There are moments in life that define us. Choices determine the courses we take. Choices that create life, or those that save a life. And some make life worthwhile. There are decisions to stay or to go, to remain the same or to grow. Sometimes we pray and make peace. Other times we take a stand for what we believe. In celebration, mourning, triumph, and defeat, we are invested in every decision we seek. Despite differences, we have one thing in common, the desire to do all for the glory of God. Keep your wallet aligned with your heart and your investments in harmony with your faith. Timothy Plan, biblically responsible mutual funds, ETFs, and retirement plans. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objective, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com. Read carefully before investing.
And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case. We begin in D.C. here, where tensions are running high on Capitol Hill today as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaks to a joint session of Congress. Dozens of progressive lawmakers are skipping what is Netanyahu's fourth address to Congress as a form of protest to his handling of the war in Gaza. Among those missing is Vice President Kamala Harris, much to the outrage of Speaker Mike Johnson.
We said the gravity of the situation cannot be overstated, and yet Kamala Harris will abandon her seat. As you all know, as the Vice President and as serving as the President of the Senate, she is supposed to be seated next to me at the rostrum. She will not be there because she refuses to attend. She needs to be held accountable for that, and she needs to be asked very searing questions about why.
A Harris aide said she'll not be in attendance today due to a conflict with a previously scheduled event. At the same time, Donald Trump VP pick, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, he'll also not be in attendance as he's currently on the campaign trail. Netanyahu is scheduled to meet with Trump on Friday following separate meetings with President Biden and VP Harris tomorrow.
Meanwhile, protesters swarmed the Capitol's Cannon Rotunda yesterday, protesting Netanyahu's speech in Congress. According to Jewish Voice for Peace, one of the organizations that put on the event, 400 American Jews demanded with a sit-in that the U.S. enact an immediate weapons embargo on the Israeli government. The organization said, quote, "The most important commandment in all of Judaism is to save a life." And by saving a life, they meant saving Palestinian lives in Gaza. While the organization claims that attendees were arrested while they acted in prayerful civil disobedience, evidence suggests the contrary. Democrat Representative Dan Kildey's chief of staff told Fox News in a statement that hundreds of protesters outside the office became disruptive, violently beating on the office doors, shouting loudly, and attempting to force entry into the office. The statement added that Capitol Police responded swiftly and cleared the Cannon Rotunda by late afternoon. Now, even though the police arrested about 200 protesters, they said the activists were peaceful. They said the arrests were made for crowding, obstructing, and inconveniencing staff near the protest.
But I see, just to be safe, they've actually once again erected that fencing around the Capitol that we saw around January 6th. I wonder if it's going to stay up nearly as long as post J6, though. Yeah,
we will have to see. I'm just surprised they were more prepared for this.
Yeah, you really would think, based on the political temperature around Israel and everything going on in Gaza. They need a little foresight there.
Right.
Meanwhile, speaking of the situation in the Middle East, Palestinian factions, including Hamas and their rival Fatah, they signed a national unity agreement in Beijing yesterday. The Chinese-brokered pact calls for an interim coalition government in what a senior Hamas official is calling a historic moment.
We're signing an agreement for national unity to say that the way to continue this path is our national unity, and that's why we're adhering to our national unity.
The Beijing Declaration also calls for the free election of a new Palestinian National Council and unified leadership ahead of future elections as well. Significantly, it's the first time that Fatah, who controls the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas have united since Hamas seized control of Gaza more than 15 years ago. Israel condemned the agreement, saying it, quote, embraces the murderers and rapists of Hamas.
Meanwhile, Iraq is pushing for U.S.-led coalition troops to begin withdrawing next month. Iraqi officials have been in Washington this week for talks on maintaining regional security against the Islamic State. But according to Newsmax, Iraq wants to see the decade-old coalition that opposes ISIS end in September of next year. The Biden administration has downplayed reports that this week's talks are about pushing foreign troops out.
If you go back to Prime Minister Soudani's visit to Washington, D.C. earlier this year, they affirmed that we would review the factors to determine when and how the mission of the global coalition in Iraq would end and transition in an orderly manner to ensure or to an enduring bilateral security partnership. This is all, of course, in accordance with Iraq's constitution and the U.S.-Iraq Strategic Framework Agreement of 2008.
Pentagon spokesman General Pat Ryder, the one you just saw on the screen, adds that the coalition is not the same thing as military cooperation between Baghdad and Washington. U.S. officials claim many of the 2,500 American troops currently stationed in Iraq will remain in an advise and assist role even if the coalition ends. Meanwhile, concerns about a possible ISIS resurgence remain high. U.S. Central Command recently revealed that ISIS has launched 153 attacks in Iraq and Syria during the past 6 months. And we have plenty more news coming up next, but first let's go to a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. In the election of 1976, Americans were looking for a remake from the Watergate scandal and the rough Vietnam years that had dominated national news. So the nation elected a man who was seen initially as a pioneer to lead the country to a new level of prosperity, but would rather end up as one of the most controversial presidents in the nation's history. Under his leadership, the United States was cast into financial chaos and foreign conflicts would grow seemingly out of control under his watch. He was the 39th president of the United States, Jimmy Carter. Now, Carter was in many ways a prototypical American man in the 20th century. He was from strong Baptist roots and a serviceman in the United States Navy in the 40s and 50s. He married his wife Rosalind during this time as well. Now, during the Kennedy administration, Carter first entered the political space, and in 1970, he was elevated to the national scene, where he became governor of Georgia. Now, Carter's governorship earned him the clout needed to make a run for the presidency on the Democratic ticket. Now, some may say his brilliance was in his timing, as the nation was disillusioned with the recent Republican administration of Richard Nixon and looking for a change. Carter ran against Nixon's replacement, Gerry Ford, and won the 1976 election. Although the optimism was high for Carter's presidency, much of his administration was doomed by economic woes in the country, and this, of course, was increased inflation rates, among other things. Now, Carter was not able to connect with many Americans either, and as a result, his popularity plummeted. Add on to that, the later portion of his presidency was clouded by increased Cold War tensions with Russia and the very troubling Iranian hostage situation at the turn of the decade of the 70s into the 80s. What happened was some Iranian nationals kidnapped some 50 Americans in the fall of 1979, and the Americans were not set free until early 1981. By then, it was too late for Carter, who lost the 1980 election to the wildly popular Ronald Reagan. Now, Carter's been much maligned in his years since his presidency, especially compared to the prosperous years that followed under Reagan. He did, however, win a Nobel Peace Prize in the year 2002. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.
But I felt very comfortable in that decision because I found a lot of support. Like, everyone here, always made sure, keep in contact with me. This is what ultimately changed my decision, knowing that I had all this support that I didn't know I had. Now that he's here, he's 4 months old, I look at him and I honestly, it just makes me want to cry,
If investing with biblical values is important to you, you're not alone. Millions of people invest their money according to their personal beliefs. That's why we offer a subscription service that gives you access to biblically responsible stocks, buys and sells, and a portfolio tracker tool that tracks your asset allocations. Being a financial issues partner is the best way to ensure your investments reflect your values. At Financial Issues, we believe in providing our partners with the best possible information and resources so they can make informed decisions about their money. With our help, you can feel confident that your investments are in line with your personal beliefs. Gain access to our biblically based stock buys and sells for only $132 per year. Invest biblically, responsibly. Go to financialissues.org and become a partner today. That's financialissues.org.
Welcome back once again to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. Well, let's continue our coverage looking back at politics, where Congress is taking action to prevent another assassination attempt from happening again. FISM's Ian Patrick has the details.
The admission from former Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle that her agency failed during a recent assassination attempt against Donald Trump is prompting concern across the board. Lawmakers grilled Cheadle during a hearing on Monday, during which she said that it was the, quote, most significant operational failure of the Secret Service in decades. Facing extensive calls to resign over the near-successful assassination attempt, Cheadle made the decision to step down yesterday. Secret Service has also reportedly called for the Trump campaign to no longer hold any rallies outdoors, but Congress isn't totally satisfied with these concessions and actions. For instance, House Speaker Mike Johnson and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries recently announced a bipartisan chamber task force to investigate the assassination attempt. Both party leaders said the task force will be made up of 13 members, specifically 7 Republicans and 6 Democrats. The panel intends to understand what went wrong on the day of the attack, to ensure accountability for everything that happened, and to prevent another one like it from happening again. The chamber will vote to establish the panel this week, with the goal of possibly providing a final report by December 13th of this year. Elsewhere in the House, some lawmakers are suggesting that this assassination attempt could soon involve other branches of government as well. House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan and Representative Darrell Issa sent a letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland this week demanding increased protections for the 9 justices on the Supreme Court. In that letter, the lawmakers say, quote, in light of the heightened rhetoric and the recent assassination attempt on President Trump, we remain concerned about the security and safety of all judicial branch officers, including and especially the safety of Supreme Court justices. As such, we request a staff-level briefing regarding the department's efforts and the steps taken to ensure and bolster the safety of Supreme Court justices. The letter cites public behavior following the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the recent legal onslaught against Justice Clarence Thomas as some examples of this so-called heightened rhetoric. In the Senate, meanwhile, lawmakers there are hoping they can find ways to make Secret Service appointees subjective to the chamber's approval. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley and Democrat Senator Catherine Cortez Masto unveiled legislation on Tuesday with this requirement in mind. That legislation would also limit directors of the Secret Service to a single 10-year term. Grassley said the bill would add, quote, transparency and accountability to the agency, while Cortez Masto said it would add the Secret Service to other federal agencies subject to similar levels of Senate oversight. Speaking of other parts of the federal government, the Federal Election Commission is also weighing in on the matter. FEC Chairman Sean Cooksey said that his agency will take up a new security ruling as soon as this month, which would allow candidates to use campaign funding for security purposes. This is Ian Patrick reporting for FISM News.
Thanks, Ian. And as the fallout continues for the Secret Service, the U.S. Army is also admitting to some failures of its own. In the wake of last year's mass shooting up in Maine, the Army has now released a report owning up to multiple failures. The shooter was, of course, an Army reservist who was institutionalized in a psych hospital just 3 months before his October shooting spree that sadly killed 18 people. The report found 3 officers who've since been disciplined were, quote, quote, derelict in their duties for failing to conduct follow-ups with him following his release. Now, despite this, the report still lays much of the blame on the local sheriff's office for not conducting an extensive welfare check in the weeks leading up to the shooting.
Meanwhile, yesterday, Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg announced that his agency will be investigating why Delta Airlines took longer to recover from last week's computer outages than their competitors. According to Buttigieg, the company's response has affected more than 500,000 passengers. The announcement came after Delta Airlines canceled over 500 flights yesterday, which was almost 50% lower than their canceled flights a day before. According to authorities, Delta is responsible for nearly 2/3 of all canceled flights in the U.S. Delta executives say they expect to return to normal operation by the end of the week. Many airlines were forced to cancel flights following a faulty update from cybersecurity company CrowdStrike. According to CrowdStrike representatives, the faulty update temporarily disabled over 8 million computers around the world, and many have since criticized the company for automatically installing the faulty update, regardless of any settings meant to prevent them from doing so. Cybersecurity experts say the crashes began when CrowdStrike developers accidentally inserted a logic error into their latest update.
Meanwhile, it was an incredible and frankly terrifying scene at Yellowstone National Park yesterday. Visitors were sent running in a state of panic in the wake of an eruption at one of the park's hot springs. You can see it on the screen right now. Truly incredible. According to park authorities, a hydrothermal explosion occurred around 10 in the morning in Biscuit Basin. That's a collection of hot springs just north of the park's most iconic geyser, that would be Old Faithful. Thankfully, there were no injuries, though the boardwalk around the area was damaged by the explosion. According to Yellowstone scientist Mike Poland, the explosion was likely due to a clog in the underground passageways that feed into the hot springs. He described the explosion as being on the big side of what researchers normally see at the park. Since 1890, at least 22 people have been killed by thermal events at Yellowstone National Park.
And lastly, the 2024 Paris Summer Olympics has officially begun, as several events debuted before the opening ceremony. Now, although the ceremony is scheduled for Friday, certain events such as men's soccer and men's rugby began early due to the length of the schedule. Other events such as archery, women's soccer, and handball will start tomorrow. According to officials, over 10,500 athletes from 206 countries traveled to Paris to compete in 45 different sports. This year's Olympics is noted for introducing a new sport, breakdancing, which will be officially called breaking. The Games also saw the return of the recently introduced sports of skateboarding, sport climbing, and surfing. The Olympic Games will take place between today and August 11th, with all live events airing exclusively on NBC.
So what's your favorite event at the Olympics, Renata?
Ooh, I gotta say, I enjoy water sports a lot.
Okay,
yeah.
That's very fun. I really like ping pong. I know it sounds weird, but when you see guys who are really good at it get into it, it's really something to watch. They'll get in the stands and everything. It's so fun.
That's very true. It does get very competitive.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's our program for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content.
Yeah, and for more updates until our next show, you can also check us out on social media, or you can download the FISM app to take us on the go. Thanks so much. God bless, and we'll see you next time with more news.